Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 6th, 2018. I have just reached for the microphone. I put it in the way of my computer screen, so I'm not 100% sure it is Friday, April 6th, 2018. I'm just going from my recollection. We have, of course, it's Friday. It's firing day at the White House, and it really has become a reality TV game show at this point. We'll see who's getting the axe, or who's being shuffled around in the cabinet, or who's being arrested, or what. The weekend's always a wild time. I assume that, let's see, it being Friday, is the president already on a plane to the golf course? I'm not really sure. We'll check in on that stuff. We got lots to cover here today. No way we'll ever get to all of it. 8,000 directions to go in. 8,000 things I'm terribly interested in and want to share with you. And we now go through the daily exercise of trying to decide whether to go with the inspiration of whatever is big on Twitter this morning, or to go deep with something on Pocket, or to do a little bit of both. Man, let's see. This morning, I guess there is... What's big in the news? Let's see. There has been, 4 or 5 things that'll make you roll your eyes and or say, oh my God, they need to arrest Trump right away. I guess the biggest, most upsetting of the bunch, anyway, is the news that what happened here? Trump, how do we explain this? Let me see if I can pick up one of the... various reports that have come my way, and I'm trying now. I mean, the easiest thing to do is to go to the Hill report. I want to try and go elsewhere and see if we can. Here we go. The Washington Post had like a legit report. The Hill, I don't know. They get much more than their due, and all it is them writing up, hey, the Washington Post reports. Kate Sherrill shared this one with me this morning via Peter W. Singer, who picked up this thing and put it this way. One of the most awful things you will read about the president. Well, that's kind of a tall order. I'll give you the screen grab, the quick and dirty, and that way we can get on to more things today. Not more important, not more interesting, not more disgusting, just more things. Picking up in the middle of a story, I guess, about the president's CIA briefing habits. I guess I might as well open up the story itself, and we'll give you the headline, and you can look for it that way. Washington Post reporting under the headline, "For Trump and his generals." We're using that in our own headlines now, as though the Washington Post was us. Okay, fine. "For Trump and his generals, victory," and that's the only thing in scare quotes, not his generals. "Victory has different meanings." I'm sorry, I keep interrupting it. And so, for Trump and his generals, quote, "victory has different meanings." It is in the Washington Post. It is Greg Jaffe doing the reporting. It is out yesterday. If you're scouring today's paper, you won't find it, I don't think, unless it's in the print edition. Here's the pull quote that Kate sent. "Later, when the agency's head of drone operations, explained that the CIA had developed special munitions to limit civilian casualties, the president seemed unimpressed." And that alone could mean anything. Either I'm not listening, I'm hungry, where are my Cheetos, my Diet Coke button isn't working, or he's genuinely, I don't care about limiting civilian casualties. Which one is it? The next sentence, I believe, clears things up. "Watching a previously recorded drone strike, in which the agency held off on firing until the target had wandered away from a house with his family inside, Trump asked, 'Why did you wait?' one participant in the meeting recalled. And, of course, that harkens back to the campaign during which he said, yes, we should absolutely be killing the families of terrorists or suspected terrorists or anybody we don't like, generally speaking. Maybe even Jeff Bezos. And That's a big thing for him. I'm sure. I mean, we call it out as disgusting. You should arrest him for war crimes, etc. Oh, well, on both sides. To be fair, there are people who say, yeah, that's awesome. And both sides should be represented on the Sunday shows. And I think probably 8 to 12 people who are pro killing the families. And then one person who says we really need to see both sides in order to represent both sides. So why don't we do that? That's how we should handle the things on Sunday. So I don't know what's in the rest of the article. It's probably fascinating. There's just too many fascinating things to get to. So let's see. That was in the news. One of the things I want to do today, I would like to spend a little bit of time revisiting the broad and very interesting stories and questions generated by the reevaluation or the very interesting different look at ISIS as a bureaucracy, ISIS as a government, might be very much of interest to us here. Did you happen to take a look through Scott Anderson's daily summary? I provided for him so he could pass on to you the link to that Cocaine Incorporated article, which was from way back in 2012. That just came to mind, and I thought an interesting comparison. It's amazing how much work people put into these very successful operations. It's a huge, huge business, and they're doing fantastically. But we have to do something about it, like kill all of them. So I thought that was an interesting comparison. And I got a note yesterday from Arliss Bunny wondering if she might come on for a few minutes and discuss MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and now I guess we should probably refer to him as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Although I guess if you're talking about a Crown Prince of that country, you can just straight up call it Saudi Arabia because it's already baked into the cake, so to speak, that this is a personally owned plot of land. It's just the entire Arabian Peninsula, or nearly the entire Arabian Peninsula. And those little bits that are owned by other people, they are bombing or trying to starve out by blockade. Just thought we could add that to the mix. But she had some interesting observations of her own about it, and I don't know whether it's going to spark a war. It won't spark, as long as it doesn't spark a war there, I guess I'm okay. It may spark an intellectual war about Saudi Arabia and how to regard them, but they are back in the news today anyway. So we're going to be back on that topic anyway. So we'll keep an eye out for Arliss Bunny if she waves a flag at any point and says, yeah, I got to get in on this conversation. In discussing it with her on Twitter, I found some old messages from about this, let's say late 2017 in discussing Mohammed bin Salman. And it was really interesting. I guess the first time it came up would have been, for us, October or so, 2017, when we were talking about his what do we call it? Is it a coup? Is it his rise to power? The arrest of his family members, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, so the thing is, Arliss had some interesting pushback on the pushback others were giving to the, what shall we say, kid glove treatment MBS and Saudi Arabia were getting in the American press. And I see so much validity to all sides in this. I'm a both sideser when it comes to Saudi Arabia. I haven't got a clue what's actually happening there. All I can say is I have a fix on several very interesting takes, which I see as equally probable. I don't know which one is true, and I don't know if it can be more than one or it just has to be one of the other. I'm really just unsure about that. But I'll set it up, or I guess we'll leave the topic open for Arliss to address if she wants to. If she can't make it here, I'll share the gist of some of the thoughts that were expressed back in October and some of the thoughts expressed yesterday, alongside the news we had yesterday of this very weird kid glove treatment, this fealty to really, I guess, probably any Saudi Arabian leader. we're constantly trying to curry favor with them. And the Trump administration, much more so perhaps than any prior administration, they're trying to curry personal favor with them because I guess they'd like to get their hands on some of the money that is floating around out there. And I said Saudi Arabia is back in the news, and Kate Sherrill has shared this one with us as well. I have a couple reports on it. They all lead back to the same place, but here's the take she's sharing from Malcolm Nance. Malcolm Nance, in his verified Twitter profile, tells us he is a former U.S. intelligence officer of some kind. I don't know exactly. He's 36 years in U.S. intelligence, he says. Expert, terrorist strategy, tactics, ideology, torture, Russian cyber, all the fun things. And a New York Times best-selling author as well. So you tell me. I don't know. I don't really know that much about him, although I have seen his Twitter profile before. I've seen his name floating around. I see him making appearances on TV. And I like the way he puts this in summarizing the story he attaches from the Daily Mail, which I know Parleo. I'm going to call you Patreon because you're here. All right. Well, anyway, everyone should give money to Parleo. How about that? I know you hate the Daily Mail. Do they all lead back to the Daily Mail? I feel like I might have had one other source, but they were definitely, pardon me, definitely the first one out of the box with reporting this story in exactly this way. Now, mine leads back to the Daily Mail, too. So, all right, we'll go through Malcolm Nance here. As predicted, and I say I'm interested in reading Malcolm Nance's tweet here because I feel like I predicted this, too, but I'm sure he predicted it better and earlier because intelligence experience. As predicted, Jared Kushner, gave the Saudis a list of enemies to arrest. Remember when we talked about this, that at some point, well, first of all, we learned that, Jared Kushner, who has just lost his security clearance, one of the most voracious consumers of classified intelligence in the White House. Also the only one able to read. But, of course, he put himself on the president's daily brief distribution list. All of this with a temporary security clearance, and known to grab up every bit of classified intelligence that he could get his hands on. And it made sense from the perspective of, well, this is the portfolio he's been handed. But because nobody believed he was either capable of handling that portfolio or interested in handling that portfolio, and he was desperately underwater to the tune of several $billion in his real estate empire, and he was dealing with people who have personal control of sovereign wealth funds, there was some suspicion that maybe he might be trading on those secrets for cash or investment. That was certainly my feeling, and I guess it was Malcolm Nance's too. As predicted, Kushner gave the Saudis a list of enemies to arrest. Clearly, Trump authorized this divulging of classified information. It's not that clear yet. He also likely tasked NSA and Treasury intel to target those Saudi civilians for MBS. We learned not only was Kushner the most voracious consumer of classified intelligence in the White House, but we also learned that he, with his Middle East peace portfolio, was making unplanned, unscheduled, and even unannounced flights to Saudi Arabia to meet with the Crown Prince, and did so unstaffed because he is staff, I guess. And although he brings personal assistants and whatnot, they stayed up until 4 a.m. talking. They had all kinds of discussion back and forth. He was tweeting or messaging with the guy on WhatsApp, and who knows what else. Nobody knows what kind of business this guy has been conducting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. But like I said, we did know that he was the most voracious and voluminous consumer of intelligence, had a huge debt, and was making a frequent practice of flying to the Middle East to speak privately after reading this very highly sensitive, highly classified information with the richest guys in the Middle East. And then when he left, a bunch of their political enemies were arrested. So maybe you had a hunch about this. And maybe the Daily Mail is talking out its ass. Let's find out. Their piece here, do we even bother giving... Do we care enough about the Daily Mail reporters to give credit? I mean, they're working reporters, right? But do we, or should we be regarding them, Parlio, as essentially Fox News people? So why bother giving them credit? Or are they just suckers? Or are they Sinclair people trapped in contracts? I don't know. This, all right, fine. Ryan Parry, the West Coast correspondent for Daily Mail. West Coast of what? I don't know. And Josh Boswell for Daily Mail. Or dailymail.com, I guess, is what they're using in the bylines. Exclusive, which may mean we made it up. I don't know. Saudi Crown Prince bragged. Remember when he bragged before? I keep interrupting headlines. I should subject. But you remember a while back, the brag was, Kushner's in my pocket. Now the brag is that Jared Kushner gave him CIA intelligence about other Saudis, saying, here are your enemies, days before the, quote, corruption crackdown, which led to torture and death. Now, we'll read this one, and then we'll see. Maybe at that point, Arliss Bunny is going to be interested in chiming in. But if not, there's an alternative way of looking at Mohammed bin Salman, and it depends on, I don't know. Well, we'll give it to you, and then you'll weigh it. And look, the answer, I'm sure, is some mix of the two. I don't know at what levels they mix. I don't have any titration formulas for you here on this. So, what's up with this? Bullet points. That's probably a good way to go through it. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met with Jared Kushner in October. That's why we were talking about him back then. Salman has since bragged about using classified intelligence from Kushner as part of a crackdown on, quote, corrupt princes and businessmen in Saudi Arabia. They probably are corrupt. He's probably corrupt in many ways, but there are probably redeeming qualities for them. They're very fine people on both sides of this, I'm sure. He said the intelligence from Kushner included information on those who were disloyal to Salman and who were his, quote, enemies, insiders tell Daily Mail. Kushner's attorney's spokesman said it was false. So there you go. That the president's son-in-law passed on secrets and that he was, quote, well aware of the rules. Take that for what it's worth. The Crown Prince launched his crackdown on corruption in November, days after he met Kushner for talks in Riyadh. Hundreds were rounded up, including princes from rival parts of the Saudi royal family and some of the country's wealthiest businessmen. But the crackdown saw accusations of torture and at least one reported death. So, that's bad. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, should we just say MBS like everybody else is doing, bragged of receiving classified U.S. intelligence from Jared Kushner and using it as part of a purge of corrupt princes and businessmen, DailyMail.com can disclose. The de facto ruler of the Middle East's largest economy is currently on a U.S. tour, which has seen him meet President Donald Trump in the White House, hold talks with a string of the country's richest and most influential people, and book the entire four seasons in Beverly Hills for himself and his entourage. And Stormy Daniels. Sources have told Daily Mail that the prince, known by his initials MBS, has been boasting about his close relationship with the president's son-in-law and senior advisor and the intelligence which he has told his circle Kushner passed to him because he's a spy and should be executed for treason. The crackdown on corruption in the Saudi kingdom, and again, quotes for corruption, was led by MBS and began in November, days after he met Kushner for talks in Riyadh. But it saw allegations of torture, as hundreds were rounded up. I'm glossing over torture. Sorry about that. Including princes from rival parts of the... Well, we heard these in the bullet points. DailyMail.com revealed a photograph showing the detainees sleeping on the floor of a ballroom at the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton and disclosed that some had been tortured. That wasn't the torture, although sleeping on the floor, got to be uncomfortable, but it is the Ritz-Carlton. But a ballroom floor, that's very hard. The New York Times later reported that one of the detainees had died from his injuries. Most are said to have reached settlements, quotes, settlements, with the Saudi government, which should also probably be in quotes. And MBS himself boasted in a 60 Minutes interview, see the kind of press attention he's getting, that the government had regained at least $100 billion from them. And keeping in mind that he is the government, maybe that's not so good necessarily. Kushner claimed through his attorney, Abby Lowell, really got to get out of this job, Abby, that it was a false story. Peter Mirijanian, Lowell's spokesman, said, we've had that name before, the alleged exchange never happened. Mr. Kushner was and is well aware of the rules governing information and follows those rules. He doesn't, but that's what I would say. Despite Kushner's denials, sources have told DailyMail.com how MBS boasted in private that Kushner was the source of intelligence used in the roundup. He also told members of his circle that the intelligence included information on who was disloyal to him. There is no way to independently verify the truth of the boast. Jared took a list out of names from U.S. eavesdrops of people who were supposedly MBS's enemies, said one source, characterizing how MBS spoke about the information. He took a list out of these people who had been trashing MBS in phone calls and said, these are the ones who are your enemies. MBS was actually bragging about it in Saudi Arabia when it happened, that he and Jared sat up until 4 a.m. discussing things, and Jared brought him this list. I mean, this all jives with what we had been reading before, but I do recall that last time around we also did get a possible explanation for why MBS might, or how he might benefit from making this story up and planting it. Although, to be honest, I cannot remember why that was to his advantage, but there was something at the time that was put forward that was somewhat convincing as a possibility. The Riyadh source said, they sat for several hours together. They literally laid out the future map of the entire region. That's why they stayed up to the early hours of the morning from the afternoon before. The afternoon, like not the morning, like they took a nap and then stayed up late. That's some life they got going on there. The intelligence allegedly discussed during Kushner's visit to the Middle East last October was said to have come from U.S. wiretaps on conversations between Arab royals in hotels in London, in major U.S. cities, and even on yachts docked close to Monte Carlo, a favorite playground of the super rich. A separate source told DailyMail.com that it was being said in the Gulf that the president's son-in-law took a copy of information from the daily intelligence briefing provided by the intelligence community to the White House. That's the PDB. And shared its contents with MBS, figuring he's an MBS, this is a PDB, three initials, same, no crime. I don't know. The intelligence named several family members who were opposed to his rise, and honestly, wouldn't you be opposed to his rise if you could make an equal or near equal claim to the ability to arrest everybody and shake $100 million or $100 million out of them? I think so. 100 anything, quite honestly. I'll take it. I don't know if I would arrest my own family. It's $100 billion. I mean, maybe I would arrest my own family for $100 billion if I thought you guys had it. Look out. I'm a very fine person. There would be very fine people on both sides of that arrest. Don't worry about it. Let's see. So, the intelligence named several family members who were opposed to his rise. It was said Kushner got hold of an intelligence briefing that said the Riyadh Palace source, recounting the version which originated with MBS. At that time, he had a high-level security clearance and had access to that. He copied it and provided its contents to MBS. Gross. Arrest him. The CIA that's very British of you, are doing their job by briefing the president on what is happening internationally. This is a briefing by the CIA to the president that some members of the Saudi royal family are plotting in this and that country. Kushner took that part of the briefing and flew to Saudi Arabia to impress MBS. So far, not discussed why bother impressing MBS, but I think we all know the answer is he might get money for impressing MBS. Now, if Kushner needed $1 billion to save 666 Fifth Avenue or something like that, and he gave MBS the information necessary to be able to shake $100 billion out of the people he arrested, how about a 1% finder's fee, and then you can save the building. And by the way, that is pretty amazing. Talk about your super rich families. Like the Saudis could buy and sell these Trump people. They're actually, turn out to be net worth nothing, but they pretend they're billionaires, as does Kushner. And this guy just had $100 billion windfall to himself, although he might claim it belongs to the country, but since he is the country, who cares? I mean, wow. Because the Kushners and the Trumps consider themselves to be, and want everybody to consider them to be, part of the super rich. This is super rich. Wow. Okay, well, anyway, what else have we got? MBS. I'm sorry. The disclosure comes after The Intercept reported that Kushner had a late-night meeting with Salman and discussed the names of Saudis who opposed his power grab. That's where we got the information that, I guess, led us to think that we like... whose tweet was it that we were reading? I've already forgotten. Malcolm Nance. Yeah. Quote, predicted this. And I guess I didn't predict it. I read it in The Intercept. The Intercept basically said that this was what happened, but I guess they didn't have enough to just simply come out and say it. They just supposed that it had happened, and correctly so. And now the Daily Mail goes a little bit further. MBS bragged to his closest regional ally, Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, that's MBZ, you remember him, the de facto joint ruler of the UAE, and others, that Kushner was, quote, in his pocket. A source told The Intercept, you remember that one. Access to the PDB is closely guarded, but Trump has the legal authority to allow Kushner to disclose information contained in it, as the president is the ultimate declassifying authority, and legally free to do so at any time. And if he needed to cover Kushner's ass, he would simply say, yeah, I declassified that, or I'm doing it now. But, I mean, I guess he'd have to have said he did it before, rather than wait until now. But that's easily enough post-dated, or whatever it is. Retroactively, you can say, I did that. Let's see. I mean, I guess there's really not much more to the details. We certainly don't have that much more time to discuss the details. But I think do you need anything else? Is there anything worse that we could add to the pile for Kushner? I don't think so. That's pretty amazing. We'll talk more about all this stuff when we come back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, I think we can wind up the coverage of the Daily Mail story, which we always have to take with a grain of salt, about what Jared Kushner has been doing, giving away state secrets to his friends / potential investors in Saudi Arabia. Okay, well, that's what? Shocking? Surprising? I don't know. You tell me. We'll see what's going on here. Okay. Oh, look at that. Oh, all right. I missed my my flag waving from Arliss. Sure. Okay. I see you now. You want to join in and catch up on the Mohammed bin Salman thing? I guess I'll set this up by saying, okay, it's obviously a lousy thing for Jared Kushner to fly to Saudi Arabia and give away the presidential daily briefing to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Now, they're allies, yes, true, but then again, Jonathan Pollard went to jail forever for spying for Israel, and they're an ally. It doesn't really matter. He won't go to jail for this because, again, the president can simply say, all the president has to say is, I told him it was okay to do that. I declassified that. Of course, then it would have been legal for anybody to give that information, I guess, if it was declassified, to give it to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and so therefore not worth very much. That would be hilarious. He declassifies the thing, or says he declassified it so that Kushner doesn't go to jail, but then the very shrewd, I don't know whether he really is, but let's say he is, Mohammed bin Salman says, well, you're asking me for $1 billion for the PDB, which when it was the highest, most sensitive, highest classified information you had, was conceivably worth $1 billion. Now that I know you gave me a declassified document, I'm not giving you the $1 billion at all. Of course, maybe he already signed it over, but he should claw it back. If all he gave him was some stupid declassified thing that anybody could have handed over, that would be pretty hilarious. And it would be very Trump-like to have that situation end that way. All right, so let's see. We'll say any time for Arliss to join us here, except half of my keyboard isn't working. This is a very weird thing. I'm just was about to message her. Okay, any Tim you want to come on here? All right, we'll make that Tim now. As I was saying, there's something has gone wrong with one half of my keyboard. It's a very weird thing, but the left half of my keyboard is dying on the MacBook Pro. And I don't know, maybe the springs are wearing out underneath those keys or something. I doubt that's anything it's worth fixing, but it's very annoying. It makes typing very difficult. But the Tim is now. As Arliss Bunny joins us, the E button not working very well, to catch up on, well, I guess, is it Mohammed bin Salman in particular?
Yeah, well, yes. And I think it's kind of sort of the overall situation, but MBS in particular. And I read a lot about this guy, and I mostly because I'm an economics wonk, and I'm trying to stay up on what's going on in Saudi economically because it's really interesting right now. But as part and parcel to that, I have to follow this guy because basically to follow Saudi is to follow what MBS is doing at any given moment, as you are so clear on.
Yeah, well, he's the government. He owns it.
He's the guy. He's the man. And I think that we make a mistake if we look at Saudi, in fact, any Middle Eastern country, through our American lens. And I've been there, so I've had the opportunity to understand how it completely incorrectly I understood a number of those countries prior to going. But the fact is that, they aren't like us. So if you think about them in terms of, and okay, let me say this up front. I'm not saying this is a good guy. I'm not saying they run their country like I would like them to.
Yes.
They don't. He's not.
That should be said up front.
Yeah. I'm just saying that it's difficult. This is a tough judgment call. This is a complex call on the part of the U.S. government. And granted, Kushner's an idiot, and he's done something that's clearly really unforgivable and cost people their lives. And I just don't think, or that's what it looks like. And I can't even fathom how that kind of thing happens. But as you are so clear and as you have said so many times, Saudi is tribal. They are not. There is no such thing as, just blithely establishing democracy in the Middle East anytime soon. In almost any country there, you have to lay sociologists, cultural anthropologists, political scientists. They'll all tell you that you have to lay democracy down on a foundation. There has to be, for instance, a middle class. There has to be an educated middle class. And I don't mean educated in a madrasa in religion. I mean a broadly educated middle class. And what you find is that when you try to impose democracy in places that there aren't these foundational elements, that you get Libya and, Iraq. So it is what I read a really good article. I think may have been in Foreign Affairs or something not too long ago. And they were saying that sort of the best thing we can reasonably hope for in the short term in the Middle East is a benevolent dictatorship in these countries. And, you know, no one wants to hear that. That's not.
That's well, yeah, it's an unpopular thing to say, generally speaking, and it usually gets at least pushed back on as well. Is that not, say the bigotry of low expectations, or to say, oh well, they're not capable of democracy? Well,
no, I think they are. I just think it takes
problematic. Time. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's probably a good middle ground to take on it and say it may be that they're not ready for democracy in the way that nobody anywhere would be ready for democracy if they had no foundation in it and no history with it.
Right. Absolutely.
We would suck at it. In fact, we're not very good at it right now.
Yeah, and we built it on the Magna Carta. I mean, we had hundreds of years of practice, building up through, in the UK and building up through, those structures until we got to a structure that worked kind of, and it's not like, it's not like we're knocking that out of the park right now ourselves. So,
right.
And, remember that we imprison a higher percentage of our population than Saudi does. And not only that, but I'm not sure that we're not executing more of our people in the street without any kind of trial. And, it's now become, I saw a thing on Twitter yesterday, black father gives his son the talk, about, not being able to hold literally any object safely. And we're kind of down to that. I mean, there's this insanity. And so I'm not sure that we're really speaking from, the mountain of, gosh, we've got this thing wired. So to get back to Saudi, it is, yes, they do terrible things.
Yeah.
But MBS has actually taking the kind of action and doing a lot of the kinds of things that it does take to actually build a real middle class. He's recognized that having a lot of young men and even wealthy young men sitting around not working and not in real jobs is not a good idea.
There is that.
Yeah.
I mean, arresting them is maybe not necessarily the favored option, right? Or putting them in the Ritz-Carlton, or however you want to put it. Yeah.
But broadly in the public, what he said is that, one of the things he said is that all of these universities, the thing about Saudi is that they do have universities that offer some sort of broad education, but really the major programs all of these universities push is their religious education. Yes. They are basically glorified madrasas. And you can get an engineering degree in Saudi, but if you really want an engineering degree, you go to, the UK or you come to the US. And so it is, he said that's not acceptable to him, that he wants real universities that have real offerings. He has pushed his father to make it, to expand the businesses and the places where women can work. Women can drive, and the really big one is that he pushed his father, who is still actually the king. He's pushed his father really hard, and they have disempowered the religious police in really dramatic ways. And the thing about it is, if you want to see Saudi move in a positive direction, that's one of the biggest steps right there. None of which forgives the fact that the war in Yemen is really on MBS. That's his war. He wanted it. He signed up for it. He's leading it. That's his baby. And there are horrific things going on there. So this guy, he takes a step forward and then he takes a step back. And in terms of economics, the war in Yemen has hurt him because they wanted this, and as has the drop in the price of oil and the U.S. becoming such a big player in the oil market worldwide, those kinds of things have pressed down the value of the Saudi. Saudi is what he has decided is that he wants to sell off a portion of basically of the oil reserves of the Saudi Oil Corporation that is owned by House of Saud. And in so doing, they want to take that money and reinvest it in two things. First of all, by 2035, something in that region, so close, Saudi will have to be an energy importer in order to continue to survive. Imagine that. So he said, no, we're going to green up. We have a lot of wind here and we have a lot of sun, and there's no reason that we should be an energy importer. So he's making it his mission in life to get a big green grid basically built there as fast as he possibly can. And, good. And then also he wants to diversify Saudi wealth so that they are no longer, so that the economy is no longer primarily dependent upon petroleum. And I really think, and that's what he's here to do, by the way. He's here to invest in corporations in Silicon Valley such that he can diversify Saudi wealth.
Yeah, I hope so. It's complicated. I can't even tell you whether I really hope so or not. That's how tough this is.
Well, except that it is a good thing, because if we can get them out of being dependent just on oil, then they're not thinking. It changes the way you think if you have to deal with the rest of the world, and if you have to in a different way. In other words, right now they're in the driver's seat in many ways. Mm-hmm. But if they have to actually deal with the rest of the world in a more of a peer kind of relationship, then that means they have to deal with the rest of the world, and that's a good thing. That brings them out of their this very sort of insular way of functioning. And I think that as easy as it is to say, they aren't everything we want them to be, we aren't everything I want us to be here either. So I tend to give this guy a little bit of leash in that he's the first Saudi leader in my lifetime. And, I'm older than you. I'm officially old. He's the first Saudi leader in my lifetime that actually looks like he wants to come into the modern world in a real way.
Yes, okay.
And that would be a miraculous thing in Saudi. I think it makes the Middle East a safer and more secure and more stable place. Obviously, the situation with Iran is volatile and getting more volatile. If we walk out of the nuclear agreement with Iran in May, that makes all of this worse. And one of the things that the Trump administration has been and in fact, probably one of the things they were talking about until 4:00 in the morning or whatever it was, is that the Trump administration is willing to provide assistance to allow Westinghouse to sell nuclear power plants into Saudi Arabia.
Yes. Yeah, I've not been a huge fan.
Yeah, and I would imagine the Israelis aren't huge fans either. And it's hard to imagine anyone named, I won't say that, but you would think that the Jewish lobby in this country would be pretty vividly, outwardly vocal on that subject, wouldn't you? I mean, they freaked out when we allowed them to, when we allowed the Saudis to buy our frontline fighters. So the thought that we would allow them to buy nuclear power plants is beyond me.
And of course, we've had some weird plans for these power plants, and this was a Mike Flynn pet project for a while too, and then they had some kind of weird thought whereby they would somehow control the possibility of weapons proliferation by only building plants that ran on on proprietary pre-packaged fuel rods that were made in the United States, and therefore we would be able to control the flow of breedable uranium to the Middle East and at large, but Saudi Arabia in particular. But then, of course, that required building giant breeder reactors in the middle of our biggest naval bases, but controlled by Saudi personnel in the middle of our big naval bases in the Norfolk area and in the middle of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where the rest of our nuclear labs are. Okay, well, that's all we're going to have is giant dirty bombs in the middle of those two, and the Saudis get to control it? That's cool. Well, good idea, Mike Flynn.
Yeah, brilliant idea. So, the fact is that we need there to not be another nuclear race in this world anywhere, and that we are sort of allowing Iran to continue to push forward and, in fact, encouraging them to move closer to their longtime enemy, the Russians. That border they have with Russia has never been they have a long history of animus with Russia in general. That we would be pushing them into their arms is crazy. It's crazy. And it's particularly crazy because of every country in the Middle East. Iran has more of the basic elements in place for was I saying just a little bit ago? Democracy. Than almost any other country, and actually maybe than any other country, because they do have a broad, well-educated, worldly middle class, and it would be possible in Iran for Iran to evolve pretty quickly into a real democracy. And they have already evolved out of being tribal in the same way that the Arabs are. The Persians, long ago actually evolved out of being strictly tribal. So Iran is never going to love us, I don't think, or not anytime in the short term going to love us, but they could be a positive factor in this world if we would stop painting them into a corner, and B, prevent them from painting us into a corner.
Well, that would be great. I'll see if I can work that out over the weekend. Maybe Jared can help me with that. Yeah, I mean, incredibly complex things happening. Steps forward, steps back, good things, bad things, things that look good that might actually be bad, things that look bad that might actually be good. I'm thinking, how do you get behind a guy who imprisons all his rivals on the say-so of Jared Kushner and then shakes no pun intended about shakes, by the way, shaking $100 billion out of their pockets and keeping it essentially for himself? If you're the government, I mean, I assume that he's got pretty, major, if not total control over that funding. On the other hand, is that $100 billion? Who are the guys that he shook down? What have they been doing with the money? Is that $100 billion out of Al Qaeda's hands in the old days? ISIS hands now? Maybe that's the old days too. Were these the Saudi royals who were passing out money to terrorist organizations / putative governments around the world, despite the fact that they were supposedly allied with us? Or are they are they not? Was it MBS who was doing it? I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
And as we back into, as they, in Israel and Gaza, as they back into what may end up being a third intifada, which would be just another heartbreaking, human tragedy. But they're playing with live ammo over there, and they're doing it in a serious way. And as that situation heats up more, we do not need more money flowing in from Saudi to Gaza if we can, help it. And we don't know exactly who is doing that funding, or at least we don't publicly know. I'm pretty sure that some guys at Langley know, but
did they tell Jared?
So we don't know if those guys, in the, locked in the hotel were part of that either. There is a lot of stuff going on.
That $100 billion could have been flowing to them from those guys, or it might now be in the hands from which it was flowing before.
Right.
Plus $100 billion. Well, I don't know. Maybe Jared did know. Maybe he didn't. I mean, what if the ultimate outcome of this was that we got it right in this sense, that those were members of the royal family who were making sure funds continually flowed to what we regard to be terrorist organizations around the Middle East and around the world. And Kushner saw the PDB enough to know that those were people who deserved what they got, essentially. Can we say anything like that conclusively enough? And then they get rounded up. And I don't know. I mean, if your portfolio is peace in the Middle East and you have just cut off the funding, $100 billion worth of potential funding to Al Qaeda, ISIS, and new generations of organizations like that, plus all the old line, are you a hero of the Republic, or are you a spy, or are you both? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure you're not a hero of the Republic if you're Jared Kushner.
Well,
but
that's probably true.
I think we can almost safely assume that. But I guess when we talk about these kinds of things, I think we need to be very, very careful not to run it through too much of our lens first, because it isn't a place in the world where they think in the same kinds of terms that we think in terms of. In other words, they're still House of Saud still is always looking back over their shoulder to see what House of Rashid is doing. It's still very much that way. So I'm not sure that it is sensible to say, entirely that MBS is a black hat or MBS is a white hat. I think he's absolutely somewhere in the middle. I think we're going to have to deal with him for decades. And I think we ought to be smart about it, because this guy, unlike Jared Kushner, who is a freaking walking idiot, MBS is not.
Oh, well, that would be a good thing. This is why they wear those checkered hats. Okay, you're not black hat, not white hat. Although they do red and white. Maybe in their country, red hat is black hat. I don't know. But this is, I couldn't sort this out for you. And you could continue making great points about it all day long and still not get anywhere about it. I see Matt Rigdon chimes in, by the way, and this would be a good observation were this to happen. But he looks elsewhere in the region for this example, Bahrain. As it happens, how much of an improvement is it to give up oil for Formula One and World Cup as the source of your income and engagement with the rest of the world? And if were that to be what comes to pass, I suppose that would be a huge waste, possibly as well. Bahrain not really in the same position to do what Saudi and Saudi Arabia could be doing to develop their resources in the future. Bahrain, probably not a whole lot of choice. We're going to basically have to drain the oil and then save what we can and see what we can do with things. And maybe we can take a cue from what is supposedly the MBS agenda and move into renewables, for at least for ourselves, But yeah, I mean, I don't know how long those little Emirates are going to last either, honestly. I mean, as long as the pile of money does, I
Emirates are
guess.
much more diversified than Saudi is in terms of where their investments are internationally. All of them are. And I think that what the difference is that MBS is looking at what kinds of jobs and what kinds of corporations and what kinds of infrastructure in terms of not just manufacturing, but forward-thinking corporations, I guess, that he can bring to Saudi. He's actually not looking at just investing. He's looking at how do I build a country that has an actual economy that is independent of oil.
Yes.
And that is new thinking in the Middle East. Well, actually, that's not true. I say that, but Abu Dhabi and those guys have capitalized on something different. They've capitalized on their really beautiful coast and on making themselves into essentially sort of not just a tourist center, but also a place for meetings and conventions and
and Eric Prince to live.
Yes. Yeah.
True.
So
there's up and down to it. And like you say, I mean, we should be building this infrastructure and building industry. How can we build these things? That's a good thing. When the answer, of course, is enslaved Pakistanis. That's a bad thing. But then how do I get that news? On my iPhone built with slave labor elsewhere. Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
And but I think that he's looking at, if I want to have a middle class and I want to have lots of educated young men, because he thinks primarily in that way, but he's also allowing for young women involved in the economy. How do I do that? Well, okay, that's thinking that we want to see. So, good.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can be, and I guess if you can do it as an autocrat, so much the better for you. There's no alternative there. You can't just sit around and have a vote on it, I guess. We've got to take our 1 minute break. I don't know if you want to hang on and sum up on the other side, but you've got that
I'll let you go. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show, right here on Netroots Radio. We continue after our short 1 minute break here for our second hour. Thanks to Arliss Bunny for coming on and carrying on the conversation and carrying it forward. It's a complicated situation. I don't know if I can recommend, I don't have a recommended outcome. I don't have a recommended side to root for. And essentially, I don't know. I think we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and eventual defeat if we worry too much about picking the right side in Saudi Arabian political maneuvering. I don't see any way to come out smelling like roses, but there's ways to come out geopolitically up and geopolitically down. And, as much as I'd like to reiterate that Jared Kushner, I think, is a dirty operator and probably ought to be in jail, he may not get his money. The most we can probably hope for is that he doesn't get to save his family's real estate holdings, and they lose some major part of it. But you know how that goes, generally speaking. Even without foreign involvement and foreign intrigues, generally speaking, I think we're already set up for disappointment here. We're well used to it in the United States of America. Multi-billionaire family has everything go south on them, but they end up basically still pretty rich. And everybody who they owe money to, who worked hard to save their real estate holdings for them, all for naught, end up not getting paid, and they go personally bankrupt. But the rich people don't. That's kind of just the way it goes. I'm not resigned to it and happy about accepting it, but we've seen it before. And I think, considering that the alternative could be, okay, if we really push everything to the max here and come down hard on everybody for everything that they do wrong, it could be the nuclear annihilation of the Middle East. That's bad. We don't want that. So, we'll take the lesser of two evils on that one. It's very weird, and I always enjoy parsing it, and although we end up coming to the same conclusion, I don't know. These people are crazy. We'd need much more intelligence and much better intelligence to really get a fix on what was going on here, and in the end, the best we could hope for is which of these autocrats do we think carries us forward in the best fashion, in the best interests of the United States / Greater Middle East / rest of the world, however you want to look at it. And the answers are rarely very good. There's plenty of reason to believe that we're going to hell in a handbasket right here in our own country, of course. One of the stories that we haven't updated in the last few minutes, because it changes minute by minute, Scott Pruitt, worse than ever. And the story, worse than ever. And as I just saw expressed on Twitter, who said it? Was it our grudging tweeter friend saying, remember optics? Tweeting in response to Paul Waldman, no relation, once again, as far as I am aware, tweeting about Pruitt and just saying, this story is unreal, attaching the New York Times piece from yesterday? Yeah, the story is unreal. Pruitt, I guess to get up to date, demanded a bulletproof car, a bulletproof desk, and a 20-person, now up to 30-person, I understand, security detail. Who the hell does he think is coming for the EPA administrator? Spectre? Hydra? The Legion of Doom? It's a good question. Of course, he thought that somebody saying to him, you're screwing up the environment on an airplane was tantamount to an assassination attempt. So, what else has happened and developed in the last couple of days / hours that we haven't updated on Pruitt? I mean, this could easily take the rest of the show. We'll try not to let it do that. But I'm going to have to scroll a little bit to see if I can find the stuff and update you on it. But there was an awful lot. Let's see. There was the chartering of the jet at $100,000 a month or something ridiculous like that. And that got shot down. And I guess there was a lot of, in addition to the bulletproof car, which I think he may have gotten, and the bulletproof desk and bulletproof everything else, and all sorts of other weird requests. And this is, I guess, related to the latest escalation. He kept making all sorts of strange requests. Let's see. I have here CBS News' report here. We'll have to keep an eye out for auto-playing video because you know how they are. They've pivoted to video over there at CBS News. Scott Pruitt asked to use sirens in D.C. traffic and was told no for non-emergency. He was, I guess, late for a reservation at his favorite French restaurant. What do we care about that? I don't know. I mean, this is amazing, by the way. I'm going to a fancy French restaurant because, one, I am a public servant, and two, I have a sweetheart $50 a night rent deal. And by the way, we now learn he has fallen behind several times on his rent. Even that cheap rate he was getting, he failed to pay on any regular basis. And I guess he pissed off his landlords who thought they were doing him a favor. But that's only because he was on his way to a fancy French restaurant. I didn't have the money because I spent it on a French restaurant. And now he's late to the French restaurant, and he says to his 30-person security detail, turn on the lights and the sirens so we can get to the restaurant early enough. In the CBS story I see here, they say he was on his way to an appointment. But I did see some other reporting later on that said he was actually on his way to a fancy French restaurant. So I'll have to see if I can find that piece. Anyway, he says, turn on the sirens. They said, you can't do that. We have sirens and lights, but that's for okay, the president has been assassinated and we need to, ensure the continuity of government, or there's some crisis in DC and you as a member of the cabinet have got to get, somewhere in an emergency. You can't turn it on because you're on your way to, even to an official meeting. No, we don't do that. Well, that's a story in itself that he wanted to do that. It's a bigger story if he wanted to do it on the way to a restaurant. A bigger story still if, as CBS reports, less than 2 weeks later, after the agent of the security team that told him, no, we can't really do that about the sirens, was reassigned to a new job within the EPA. Special Agent Eric Weese, W-E-E-S-E, a 16-year veteran of the EPA, was replaced by Pasquale Nino Perrotta, who's a legitimate security guy. Don't get all prejudiced about it. I don't know. Maybe he isn't. Perrotta now leads Pruitt's unprecedented 24-hour protective service detail, which determined that Pruitt needed to fly in first class because of specific ongoing threats associated with the administrator's air travel. I don't know whether he was involved in kicking the door down or whatever. But basically, though, the head of his special 30-person security detail said no to him, so he replaced him with someone who would say yes to him, and then later say, yes, you should fly first class, or yes, you should consider chartering an aircraft of your own at $100,000 a month. Yes, you should consider a bulletproof desk and a bulletproof car. Sure, that's going to be really, really great. I did have another piece here somewhere that says that, I don't know whether CBS goes on to say the same, but the New York Times is reporting on it, was that something like 5 or more EPA officials in various capacities who had at one time or another said no to a request for various extravagances for Scott Pruitt have all likewise been reassigned. Eric Lipton, Ken Vogel, Lisa Friedman reporting this one. At least 5 officials at EPA, 4 of them high-ranking, were reassigned or demoted or requested new jobs in the past year after they raised concerns about the spending and management of the agency's administrator, Scott Pruitt. Concerns included unusually large spending on office furniture and first-class travel, as well as certain demands by Mr. Pruitt for security coverage, such as requests for a bulletproof vehicle and an expanded 20 person protective detail. Maybe I'm just wrong about that. According to people who worked for or with the EPA and have direct knowledge of the situation. Or maybe I'm right. Maybe he requested a 20-person detail. They said no. He fired them. He got a new person who said, you know what, you can have 30. The political appointee, there's another paragraph in here. Mr. Pruitt bristled when the officials, 4 career EPA employees and 1 Trump administration political appointee, confronted him, a Trump administration appointee, confronted him and said no to this stuff. The political appointee is Kevin, Chmielewski. We're going to guess C-H-M, which doesn't make any sense, C-H-M-I-E-L-E-W-S-K-I. All the Lewskis are involved in the Trump administration, I guess, and the Dowskis and the Lewskis. The political appointee, Kevin Chmielewski, will say, was placed on administrative leave without pay. My goodness. According to 2 of the people with knowledge of the situation, he was among the first employees of Donald J. Trump's presidential campaign, serving as a senior advance official. The 2 people who are administration officials, I guess the sources on this, said that Mr. Chmielewski flagged some of his concerns about Mr. Pruitt directly to the White House's Presidential Personnel Office. And you know what experts those guys are. Those are, of course, the Mining and Mineral Leases Office / Coalition Provisional Authority guys who are drinking Smirnoff Ice and, allegedly staffing the administration. 2 of the career officials, and they're identified here, Reginald E. Allen and, there's Eric Weese, the security guy, were moved to jobs where they had less say in spending decisions and less interaction with Mr. Pruitt, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. A 3rd career official, John E. Reeder, joined American University as a temporary executive in residence after being told by the EPA to find a new job. That's called you're fired. And John C. Martin, who served on the security detail, was also removed from the team and had his gun and badge taken away. You know how they hate that. After raising concerns about how Mr. Pruitt's security was being handled. A 6th official, Mr. Pruitt's chief of staff, Ryan Jackson, also raised questions about Mr. Pruitt's spending, according to 3 EPA officials. He remains in his job, but is considering resigning, agency officials said. Mr. Jackson came to the agency from the office of Senator James M. Inhofe, Republican of Oklahoma, who, like Mr. Pruitt, Oklahoma, had been a major critic of regulatory moves made under President Barack Obama and is a prominent climate change skeptic. Approval was required by the staff officials for certain of Mr. Pruitt's expenditures, and Mr. Allen, Mr. Chmielewski, Mr. Jackson, Reeder, at various points, each voiced concerns to Pruitt directly about his spending. Neither Mr. Jackson nor any of the 5 officials who left or were removed after questioning Mr. Pruitt would comment when contacted by the New York Times before their reassignments or removals. Let's see. Weiss was the head of Pruitt's protective detail. Reeder, Allen, and Chmielewski each served as deputy chief of staff. Does that mean he's been through 3, or does he have several deputy chiefs at the same time? The White House declined to comment, referring questions to the EPA, which probably isn't going to help anything. And let's see. The president was, I guess, questioned on an Air Force One flight about Pruitt, and he says, no, he's great. We still love him, so he's fired, I guess. We'll see. It's pretty amazing that it's gotten to that point, and it's a total circus over there, and I don't even know what else to add to this. Is there any other information here that I've got that might give us more about that fancy restaurant? Where did I see that? I might have been on Twitter, and it's true if it happened on Twitter. Now here's something that Talking Points memo picked up, and just to add a capper to all this. There's probably more, and I can't remember what we're skipping on this, but this is really, I think this will be the last word on it for today, unless something else happens while we're still in the air. Let's see. Trade Sheet says Pruitt's fall was fallout from Rob Porter abuse scandal. Can you believe this one? Josh Marshall wrote this one up himself. Inside EPA, an EPA trade sheet, reports that Scott Pruitt's downfall, which hasn't happened yet, by the way, he's just got bad optics. Remember bad optics? That used to count for something. He's not out yet. Oh, and by the way, does this even get mentioned in here? There was discussion yesterday on Twitter, rumors that Trump was floating Pruitt's name as a possible replacement for Jeff Sessions, the now perhaps most corrupt cabinet member Trump has got, and that changes every day. It's a very fast-moving game. Let's make him the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. That seems like from an experiential point of view, it makes some sense. Pruitt, of course, was attorney general in Oklahoma. He was terrible, and he's a horrible human being, as it turns out, and a corrupt son of a bitch, but he was once attorney general somewhere, and so some people will see that and say, now it makes sense. So anyway, that's a separate story. I don't think it's mentioned here. Here's the crazier part. So Inside EPA says that there's a connection between Pruitt's not quite complete downfall and the Rob Porter story. In fact, that it is the work of disgraced former White House aide Rob Porter, who has landed on his feet with a cushy job at the Trump campaign, which is nuts. I don't know even why. Trump is variously reported as being unhappy and just wistful about Porter's departure from the White House, and that he wants to bring him back. But what's the problem? You're employing him anyway over at the campaign. And by the way, isn't that the most ridiculous thing you ever heard? Well, you can't stay here. We're firing you from the White House because, one, you have didn't he have a gambling problem as well? And he had a tremendous debt. Plus, you're suspected of beating 2 wives. You're out of here. However, you're hired at the campaign. So, all right. Who am I to say anything? Just an observer who, lives on Earth and understands. But okay. So what happened here? That it's actually Rob Porter himself, I guess, no longer be able to busy himself beating up wives, and separated from Hope Hicks, who he was reportedly dating. Remember when that was the story? And Corey Lewandowski is the one who leaked the info on Porter because he was jealous that Porter was maybe dating Hope Hicks well, here's a Saudi Arabia story for you. What if Lewandowski turned Porter's info over to the press, knowing that it would cost Porter his job in the White House? in order to save Hope Hicks from getting the crap beat out of her eventually too. I don't know. It's fantasy to ascribe a possibly noble motive to Corey Lewandowski. So let's just stop right there. But what if? I mean, as long as they keep giving me Marvel Comics movies, I'm going to make this movie. Why not? An alternative reality. We could do this all day long, or at least for 2 hours daily, 5 days a week, let's say. Okay, so here's what was basically reported at the time, as Josh puts it. Porter's downfall seems to have started when a former girlfriend, Samantha Dravis, with an R, went to White House officials and told them what she knew about Porter's past, particularly his abuse of 2 ex-wives. Dravis, ready, was a top aide to Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator. Wow. So, what does this mean? It was never explicitly clear whether Porter had also abused Dravis, but she seems to have been a key reason why his past came to light. Inside EPA is reporting that in retaliation, Porter started leaking information about her boss, Pruitt, from the article. And what article? Oh, yes, from the EPA Insider. Rob Porter, a top former aide to President Donald Trump, who was fired earlier this year over domestic abuse allegations, is reportedly the source, or a source, of information about EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt's ethical transgressions that are threatening his future at the agency after Porter's relationship with a top former Pruitt aide soured, sources say. Dravis's resignation was announced earlier yesterday. That in, I guess, the CBS News story, or a separate CBS News story. What about that? Like love triangles all over the place that are bringing down cabinet officials, except that they're not bringing them down. They're moving them from EPA to Department of Justice, possibly. What amazing, how amazing would that development be if Corey Lewandowski accuses, or I wonder if, now, how about this? Does Corey Lewandowski use Dravis, or does Dravis meet him and then say, Rob Porter is a total scumbag? Oh, really? Well, here, you should turn him in, and I'll connect you with the people you need to give the information to so that he's gone. But now Hope's gone too, and where does she land? And what if she ends up at the campaign? And so the whole thing has been for naught. And then in the end, Scott Pruitt ends up as Attorney General. It's like a soap opera over here. How amazing would that be? Corey Lewandowski tells Dravis to turn over info on Porter. Porter loses his job. In retaliation, he leaks information on Pruitt in an effort to hurt Dravis. And I mean, Dravis does resign, so presumably she is hurt by that. I don't know. It's amazing, by the way, that it never occurs to people. This is amazing stuff. I mean, it's great soap opera material in that you can sort of kind of understand on a personal level the motivations to stab one another in the back. Well, she did this to me, so I'm going to do that to her. And at no point, though, does anybody say, well, okay. But at the same time, that we have these personal problems amongst ourselves. We are talking about possibly destabilizing the government of the United States of America. So maybe we just, swallow hard and move on with our lives at this point. And by the way, that's how essentially Democrats and sane people generally approach the problem. These sort of weird dualities wherein we say, for instance, I'm going to parse the Constitution over this one. Okay, Donald Trump, let's say, I don't know, murders 6 children in cold blood with his bare hands as part of his routine administration of a child sex trafficking ring. Let's say he just does that. And we say that is illegal in the United States of America, technically speaking. And so we'd like to prosecute you for that. But that is we're talking about indicting a sitting president of the United States. That is potentially destabilizing to the government of the United States. And you know how we are about that. We tend to say, for instance, that if you absolutely demand a solution right now, just because you're so anti-child murder, fine, snowflake, we'll let you have your way. You know the remedy, impeach the man. But the politics of it are impossible. So you're just going to have to sit and wait. You can't indict a sitting president, we say to ourselves. And some people convince themselves, yes, as horrible as the personal involvement in the murder of child sex slaves is to us, as offensive as we find that, the United States of America, the Constitution, the flag, truth, justice, the American way, we just can't. It's not the same. He's not like a regular person. Why, if he was a civilian, we would absolutely throw the book at him, or possibly bribe the Manhattan DA not to throw the book at him. I don't know. 6 of one, half dozen of another. The point is, he is the president, and we just can't with this stuff. Right? And, you know, the rest of us put stuff like that. We actually go through this kind of stupid exercise to maintain the stability and continuity of the United States government. These guys, he dated my girl, or whatever the hell's going on, and I'll destabilize the world if that's what it takes to get back at that guy who's dating the person who would never have anything to do with me anymore, or whatever. But okay, you know, I didn't tell you this bunch of loons was a sex cult for nothing, did I? Okay. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that at some point. It's really kind of crazy out there, and they should all be arrested and possibly executed for treason. I'm just saying, and if you want a place to, you know, experiment with lethal injection drugs, you absolutely insist that that's got to go forward, fine. I have a group in mind that you might use for that. Okay, there's more stories out there. Let's see. What else is crazy enough to make it into the last segment, and what can we shoehorn in before we take our last break? How about this one? I mean, it's out there. Who's reporting it? I have this from Raw Story, and, you know, Raw Story, low reporting budget, as we know, and so very likely that they are working off of someone else's work here, and in fact they are. This taking place in Syracuse, New York. Syracuse.com. I keep knocking Raw Story, and I really don't mean to. I should, and I every time I try to recover by saying, you know, they really are doing good work, and they really are. I mean, here's the thing. Was it Syracuse.com's work? Yes. Are they simply repackaging that for my clicks and attention? Yes. Was I clicking on Syracuse.com? Had I heard the story elsewhere? Nope. So kudos to Raw Story. Everything's complicated, even whether or not I like Raw Story. Mass shooting thwarted at Syracuse University by gun shop owner who denied man AR-15 and called police. That sounds pretty good. Police were able to thwart, they say, another potential mass shooting. This time the attack was aimed at Syracuse University. It's all thanks to one gun shop owner who denied the possible shooter an AR-15 despite having all the legal rights to purchase one. And this is another one of those complicated situations in which, for instance, gun nuts and gun rights advocates, whatever you want to call them, will say, see, the responsibility of an individual firearms dealer is what stepped in here, not federal authority or overbearing federal law that would have denied this guy the AR-15 as a matter of law, which wouldn't matter because criminals will get them anyway, unless there's a conscientious gun dealer in between every criminal. I don't know. So, I mean, again, this is like serendipity here. Thank God that there was a guy who gave a crap who was doing the selling here, because it could have gone either way. And at the same time, so could the advocacy, because apparently, as they says, despite the fact that the guy had everything lined up legally to be able to purchase this thing, this guy said no. And by the way, if it had been me that denied the guy the AR-15, despite the legality of the sale, I would have been a filthy, disgusting commie gun grabber. But because it was this other guy who makes a living selling guns and so therefore is a good gun guy, who denies this guy his God-given right, by the way, to that AR-15, as well as legal right, in case you care about such things. I don't know, now he's a gun hero or something. I really, it's hard to figure this out, and it's hard to figure out where your sympathies ought to lie in this one, except to say it is unequivocally a good thing that a guy did not perpetrate a mass shooting at Syracuse University, and that doesn't even, I won't even make allowances for, basketball allegiances. Like, yeah, you can't be like, oh, I hate Syracuse or I hate Duke University, so there should be a mass shooting there. Don't do that. None of you were about to. You have to, I don't know, we have to inject some humor or we're all just going to go crazy in this thing. A 22-year-old student, a Chinese student, Xiaoteng Zhan, I guess, is it okay to say his name because he's not a mass shooter? Deported to China in the end, by the way. I'll return to the story in 2 minutes and tell you what happened. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, our last segment for the day, and it's Friday, so we'll see what we can squeeze in. In reviewing what's going on here, I'll, of course, give you a link to the story. It's actually a rather complex storyline to try to follow exactly what happened when here. But as I'm reviewing this thing, I see, well, the one weapons dealer, I don't know where the first guy was, the gun shop. It just says... a gun shop in New York's Madison County denied him the AR-15. Then he went to Dick's Sporting Goods, and they denied him as well. And I'm not certain that they had AR-15s in stock there or what, but it is amazing that everybody denied him this. But then there's some word in here that I guess police at some point, it says police weren't able to get a search warrant, but they did learn that John had sought psychiatric help at 2 different facilities. He exhibited suicidal behavior, depression, and a feeling that he might lose control and act violently. Jean was then put on the list of people prohibited to purchase weapons, which leads me to wonder why it would be said that he has a legal right to those weapons if he's on one of those lists, but I don't know about the chronology. So you should, I recommend that you sort this out for yourself because there's so many other things that we could be spending our time on, but I'm glad that got resolved. Here's one of the great features of Raw Story is that they also tease a bunch of other amazing stories with pretty good headlines. I'll not read this one. I'll simply say this caught my eye. It might catch yours too. And I'll open it up so I can provide the link to you later. Next on Raw Story, it says, crusading Christian DA resigns after being accused of trading light sentences for sex with defendants. Man, it's a sex cult everywhere. Former Bedford County District Attorney William Higgins is the guy in question. I guess that's Pennsylvania because it's being reported in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Bedford County District Attorney William Higgins stepped down from his position after he was charged by a grand jury of offering female convicts leniency if they met his sexual demands. That feels a little Roy Moore-ish, even. But I don't know that Roy actually did that. But what a story. So, I don't know. Take a look at that one, too, if you will. Sounds like a fun topic for weekend discussion. It never ends with these guys. All right. There's more of everything. Let's try and jump around a little bit and share a bunch of them. Wall Street Journal has this one. We'll see whether they have blocked me with their paywall, in which case I'll read it from the Pocket View. But what's driving Trump's attacks on Amazon? It's personal. He hates Jeff Bezos. President's attacks on e-commerce companies stem from its CEO Jeff Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post, which Trump says covers him unfairly, say people close to the White House. Which, by the way, I mean, I assume everybody has made this connection in their minds, but weren't liberal snowflake, libtard, jackass, commie jerks just faulted for driving whatever that dude's name is out of the Atlantic? Was it Eric? Is it Williamson? Do I have it right? I mean, is it that simple of a name? The guy who apparently once wrote/tweeted, and apparently that makes a difference in some people's minds, that women should be hanged for having abortions. And then we said maybe that's not a good idea to say that. And there's a controversy among the journo types. Well, you know, you're stifling speech. I guess, what's his name from BuzzFeed? Ben from BuzzFeed offered up the view, was it him? I don't know. Well, you know, liberals are creating this problem. If you define that sort of speech from otherwise maybe sort of kind of, I guess the excuse is supposed to be reasonable Republicans, it's not a reasonable thing to say. It's not a reasonable Republican. Maybe some other things he says are reasonable, whatever. You deny them the ability to speak. You classify them as the other and say you're basically the same as alt-right and Nazis, etc. And you cannot have a piece of our polite society to discuss these other ideas you have in, even if they don't involve hanging women. You drive them into the arms of the alt-right and you create the conditions necessary to elect Donald Trump. So apparently now we have to lecture ourselves and say, liberals are responsible for Donald Trump by declaring Donald Trump-like rhetoric unacceptable. Well, that seems like a bit of a feedback loop. We're going to have a problem with that one. Think about that for the weekend. I'm going to have to go over to the Pocket View to give you this piece from the Wall Street Journal. Do I have the author right? Peter Nicholas reports it this way. Early in President Donald Trump's term, oh yes, I forgot to complete my comparison. Libtard jerk-ass commies are responsible for the death of America and the death of the First Amendment, which we love even more than the Second Amendment, unless we're talking about the Second Amendment, in which case I love that one more. You're ruining America because you are telling these publications that they can't engage in this kind of free exchange of ideas. So it's your fault, and Trump is president because of it. Meanwhile, hurrah for Trump, who says, I'm going to destroy the Washington Post because they said bad things about me. You snowflake. I want you to stop asking for safe spaces because I'm such an open exchange of ideas guy. How can we do both at the same time? We can't. It's hypocritical. But so what? LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. Early in President Donald Trump's term, Peter Nicholas writes, when White House officials heard him complain vociferously about Amazon.com Incorporated, they arranged private briefings in the Oval Office to make sure that he would talk knowledgeably about the company. Why? Gary Cohn, his top economic advisor, and other officials gave PowerPoint presentations and briefing papers they believed debunked his concerns that Amazon was dodging taxes and exploiting the U.S. Postal Service. And guess what? It turns out that the Pocket View isn't going to give me any more than they figured out their paywall finally over at the Wall Street Journal. The story basically is they told him what was really going on with Amazon.com and their relationship with the post office. And he said, in other words, they said, yeah, this thing, the idea that Amazon free shipping is ripping off the post office. You don't understand what's going on here, sir. That's not true. It doesn't work like that. And he just basically said, to hell with you. I just won't listen. I will launch those attacks that way anyway, because probably because, I don't know if he thought it all the way through, but if he had, he would say it's probably because it sounds truthy. People will believe it. They know Amazon free shipping. That's a thing that rings a bell with them. If he were a master propagandist, that is to say that he understood propaganda and how it worked and did things consciously, he would say people that rings a bell with people that will stick with them, and they'll say, yeah, how does Amazon offer free shipping? And dumb people will say that means the post office is shipping everything for free, and he's dumb, and he might be one of those people that believes that. slightly smarter people will say, I guess you could make an argument, well, it's certainly being shipped at a discount because of the volume that they're doing, and they're passing that savings on to consumers. And everybody knows that's un-American. We don't do that. And so therefore something must be going on here. That's basically the gist of this story. I would recommend that you read it, but you can only do so if you have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. I think Greg does. Maybe he can share that text with us one day, and we won't tell anybody except on the radio. There's another story that I think you need to be aware of, and it's in the Weekly Standard, and I hate having to refer to them, but they're not the craziest bunch of Republicans in the world. They just are Republicans, so I'm annoyed at having to pay attention to them. I don't know how the writers are over there, and I don't know about this guy. Who is it? Michael Warren. You tell me. The thing is that it was brought to my attention by Bill Kristol, and he's still a jerk. So he hates Trump, but okay. How Trump's White House creates an anti-immigration feedback loop. We were just talking about feedback loops. We have always intuited that this one works more or less this way, but this is a good documentation of the process. The monomaniacal White House talking points Michael Warren is writing about. There are, and the bigger story is sort of buried in here. They are emails designed to grab you by the lapels. All caps here in this one. Crisis at our southern border, announced one. This one not in all caps, but MS-13 is, quote, taking over the school. One teen warned before she was killed. Read another. The subject lines are always over the top. Criminal aliens set free by sanctuary cities. National security threats, chain migration, and the visa lottery system. Quote, I wish I had killed more of the mother, blank, blank, blank. Says illegal immigrant accused of killing 2 cops. U.S. permanently resettled nearly 142K Bangladeshi nationals on basis of familial ties. Previously deported Mexican national convicted of raping 9-year-old girl in Sanctuary City. These aren't news blasts from some anti-immigration group or a right-wing news site like Breitbart. They come directly from the White House, sent from an official government email address. That's the big news. They are the work of Kelly Sadler, the, quote, director of surrogate and coalitions outreach in the White House Communications Office. Sadler's job is to disseminate the White House's thoughts, views, and talking points to friendly journalists, cable news pundits, radio and TV hosts and producers, and anyone else who might be willing to put out the administration's preferred line. And those are their preferred lines. For most of 2017, Sadler and the White House communications staff used its general surrogate list to organize conference calls and blast out emails on every topic from tax reform to national security. But last fall, something changed. Sadler's emails began to focus almost exclusively on immigration issues, when the recurring theme that America is facing a crisis. Since November, she has sent more than 50 emails to the general surrogate list about immigration, including one nearly every weekday since late January. An email on March 20th offered an immigration crime news roundup for the previous several days. Several emails have focused on the brutal MS-13 Latino gang, and in recent weeks, there's been an emphasis on the proliferation of thousands of unaccompanied alien children in the country. The result of Sadler's efforts can be best described as a feedback loop. Her sensationalist headlines make it into conservative media, which the president himself digests and responds to, leading to more sensationalist headlines. On February 21st, for instance, she sent out a Washington Examiner story. MS-13 spreads, fed by 300,000 illegals, DACA recipients, tied to 207 murders. Nice construction. We see what you're trying to do there. Which promoted a story from the Center for Immigration Studies, a restrictionist organization. That Examiner story was then linked to on the Drudge Report and spread through conservative media online. The producers at Fox and Friends seem to have read it too, because the president's favorite morning show featured a segment on the issue of MS-13 and an interview with the author of the relevant study, Jessica Vaughn. Minutes after the Fox and Friends segment ran, Trump tweeted about it. MS-13 gang members are being removed by our great ICE and Border Patrol agents by the thousands. But these killers come back in from El Salvador and through Mexico like water. El Salvador just takes our money. What? When? How? What? And Mexico must help more with this problem. We need the wall. Sadler's emails feature the same sort of language that Trump-friendly media, from Fox News to the depths of the alt-right blogosphere, are using to describe the most recent flashpoint in the immigration debate. A caravan of 1,200 or so Central Americans moving its way into Mexico and possibly to the southwest border of the United States. On April 3rd, the president himself tweeted out about the march. The big caravan of people from Honduras now coming from Mexico, across Mexico, and heading to our weak laws border had better be stopped before it gets there. Cash cow NAFTA is in play. No, it isn't. And as is foreign aid to Honduras and the countries that allow this to happen. Congress must act now, he wrote. One day later, the administration announced a presidential memorandum authorizing the deployment of the National Guard to assist border agents along the border with Mexico and a renewed push for border enforcement legislation. Of course, we now hear that they'll be going unarmed, which is maybe a good idea, but also kind of maybe a waste of time. I don't know what to tell you about that, but there it is. It's unclear who at the White House is behind the communication strategy. Sadler herself says she's not authorized to speak to reporters, people who want to find out, what are you doing? Oh, I'm not authorized to speak to you. I'm only authorized to tell you what to print. Okay, and they also, I guess, reached out to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. No questions answered about the email blast. Republican on Capitol Hill, multiple Republicans, say the subjects are reminiscent of the interests of, remember we were talking about his low profile the other day? Stephen Miller. That's probably who's behind this. The former aide to Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, who helped marshal opposition to comprehensive immigration reform efforts in 2013, and who is now one of the most powerful aides in the West Wing, and otherwise keeping his head down. Miller is the most conversant and combative White House advisor on immigration issues. He conducted a press briefing last August, in which he battled reporters over immigration statistics and accused CNN's Jim Acosta of advocating a policy of unfettered, uncontrolled migration and open borders. After an abortive interview with CNN's Jake Tapper in January, Miller went to friendlier hosts like Tucker Carlson of Fox News and joked that if he, quote, was a member of MS-13 here illegally, CNN would be clamoring to get me into the voting booth. You see where this is coming from. Sadler's emails routinely sex up federal agency press releases. An April 2nd email read, "Crisis at our southern border. ICE saying 99 MS-13 gang members arrested in latest enforcement operation entered our country as unaccompanied alien minors." This was a far from accurate representation of the accompanying Department of Homeland Security press release. What DHS announced was the arrest of 24 gang members in New York as part of an ongoing interagency program to tamp down on transnational gangs that draw their membership from immigrants. Those 99 unaccompanied minors arrested, that was over the program's 10-month existence, which was part of a nationwide enforcement operation against gang activity that claims to have made more than 3,200 immigration arrests since 2012. A robust law enforcement effort combining federal and state and local resources to deal with a serious problem, yes, but is it part of a crisis? All right. It goes on and concludes not long thereafter, though I do want to try and get to a couple of other things as well that are important and deserve our attention. But yeah, this is official, like, White House resources being used to send Breitbart headlines out there, and nobody has anything to say about this one. I mean, everyone will oppose it, but nobody knows, I guess, how or whether it's even possible to turn that off and just say, yeah, this is beyond the pale. You can't use official resources for this. In any other administration, that would have stopped dead in its tracks, but not here. Just thought we'd share that one with you. I've got a couple of other things. I can't fit everything. I should note, for the record at least, that Madeleine Albright has a piece in the New York Times under the title of "Will We Stop Trump Before It's Too Late?" The answer, of course, is no. My suggestion, though, is that you tell him that there's a deal being cut for a Trump tower in The Hague, and he should go there immediately to sign the deal, and maybe you can stop him that way. But no, we won't stop him before it's too late. It's already too late. But it's interesting that Madeleine Albright is chiming in on this one. That's a voice we'd want to hear from. So you should review that over the weekend as well. Let's see. Other stuff, essentially, that requires discussion. I'm going to have to, I think, take a pass for the day on the generously submitted recorded piece from our friend via Twitter, Thor Gamma, Mark Hogue, who we last heard from in his pushback on the personality testing, has an entry in similar vein, but I can't just refer you to it. I got to play it for you. He takes a look at that authoritarianism test, the personality test that Greg mentioned, and reads us the questions. I'll tease that one for you for next week. You got to hear his reading of these questions. I actually laughed out loud at some of these, and I guess that's really the point. But no, I can't get to it, even though it's only about 6.5 minutes long. There's too many other things I want to try and cram into that 6.5 minutes. But I appreciate it, and do stay tuned. So I'm teasing you. I should release it as bonus content. I'm going to have to get to the point where we do bonus weekend content here just to keep up with things. But it wouldn't be a bad idea as a money-making venture. But I hate to charge you for information. It just seems so wrong. Okay. Here's another capper. One more Scott Pruitt piece of information. So a little bit disjointed. Mark Seagraves tweeted this one. He's a reporter for the NBC affiliate here in Washington, D.C., NBC4. I thought this was a great capper. The D.C. government... no link here, just the tweet. D.C. government issues citation to owner of apartment Scott Pruitt rented. And, of course, we know that's the lobbyist power couple, the, what's their names? Harts, is that right? Anyway, they're getting fined by the D.C. government because they didn't have a proper license to rent the unit. Possible fine, not huge, $2,034. But, of course, they were only getting $50 a night for it. That's a bunch of nights involved there that they would end up losing. It's pretty amazing. And I just thought it was a great capper. Like, once again, everything Trump touches, even indirectly, turns to a pile of dung and gets all over you. You know, all I'm doing, I'm just renting, even if you rented it at the right price. I'm renting an apartment to a guy who works in the Trump administration. Oh my God, Trump is involved. You're going to get in trouble. Don't do it. Yeah, well, it could go wrong. Simple agreement, $50 a night. He only pays if he stays there. It's like Airbnb. Yeah, well, you're not zoned to do that. Nobody would think to check. Just a proper capper to it all, right? You imagine this person now is in legal trouble because Donald Trump... Trump has nothing to do with it. Well, he only hires the best people, right? So if you're renting something to somebody he hired, you're going to have problems because those guys are disgusting. They all suck, and you're going to F yourself up by dealing with them even, 6 degrees separated. It's just a never-ending story for these guys. All right, let's see. What else? Many more things. This is a big story for the weekend as well. I think you should be aware of this one and ready to discuss it. I saw a great tweet storm that went along with it from Lydia Paulgreen, editor-in-chief at HuffPost, sent out their story. Unmasked. Here's the real identity of Ricky Vaughn, one of Trump's most powerful alt-right internet trolls. Stellar reporting, and I think it really is, from Luke O'Brien. You should take a look at the story. It's unbelievable. The title under which it's tweeted here is that maybe I'll open up the story and just get the actual headline here. Trump's most influential white nationalist troll is a Middlebury grad who lives in Manhattan, of all places, New York City. But then, of course, that's where Trump is from. And so I guess it's okay. You probably saw this guy without, even if you weren't actually targeted by this guy or his minions, you probably saw his avatars flashing by. And of course, he was responsible for some of the most disgusting crap out there. And as it turns out, he's a pudgy, doughy Middlebury College grad who could, let's say, if the conditions were right, and we don't advocate for such things, be easily found in Manhattan and have the absolute living crap kicked out of him in public. But, we hope that they don't Adolf Eichmann snatch this guy away and, end him somewhere, right? It's just interesting that the possibility exists that the guy has been such a champ from behind the keyboard because he thought he'd never be identified, and now he is, and but I'm sure he's escaped Manhattan by now. Paul Green's tweet storm really kind of sums it up here, saying to get a sense of how powerful the account was, the Ricky Vaughn account, consider this. The MIT Media Lab named him to its list of top 150 influencers on this of the election based on news appearances and social media impact. He finished ahead of NBC News, ahead of The Drudge Report, ahead of Stephen Colbert. This is the kind of thing Ricky Vaughn trafficked in, and of course he's got a couple of anti-Semitic cartoons that he loved sending around as examples. Ricky Vaughn helped amplify messages, by the way, from Twitter accounts later found to be Kremlin-controlled. Screen grab from the Luke O'Brien story. Ricky Vaughn also played an important role in amplifying disinformation injected into American politics by the Russian government. HuffPost and a team of data scientists known as Susan Borbaki Anthony, and I'm not sure what that even is supposed to mean, that tracks online propaganda, analyzed who was retweeting the now infamous Kremlin-controlled Twitter account 10_GOP, which consistently praised Trump, attacked Democratic rival Hillary Clinton, churned out vile medley of racism, Islamophobia, and fake news. And the answer, Ricky Vaughn, very big in that. So who is Ricky Vaughn? A 28-year-old Middlebury grad who lives in New York City. He appears to have followed the Gamergate to alt-right pipeline, verifying all of that reporting and theorizing that went on here on the air and elsewhere around the Twitter sphere. Really an amazing story. And of course, the man is identified, and there's lots of photos of him hobnobbing around in New York City. So there's a lot of people who are waking up to that news yesterday and saying, oh my God, I absolutely know that guy. I didn't realize he was living a double life as a secret Nazi troll. Really rather an amazing story. So I recommend it to you. Also sent to me by several listeners and Twitter friends, Kate Sherrill included, Kurt also, right? Sent this one to me. Let's see if I can find all of that. But that's here we are. Audible Video, Kurt. We know him as Kurt because that's easier to remember. But a scoop of sorts here. Let's see. We'll open it up. A thread from Robert McGuire _ about targeted ads in the election. And this one clearly laying out that Robert Mercer, once again, heavily involved in a dark money group that spent the end of 2016 distributing and paying for some of the most vile anti-Muslim advertising of the election. And all of this finally exposed, and the list of donors exposed as well, at least to some extent. And guess what? It pretty well matches the guest list at that famous costume party that he gave out in his Long Island estate as well. So a couple of examples of these horrific things. Basically, they are, essentially creeping Sharia type ads, and America, France, Germany, all of us going to be taken over by violent Islamic terrorist extremists, and it's already happening, and you can only stop it if you elect Donald Trump, etc., etc. Pretty damning information about it, all laid out for us by Robert McGuire, who tracks secret political money for Open Secrets DC, collaborating with NPR, CNN, Washington Post, and others. So there you go, by way of credentialism. You should absolutely check that one out too. And now we've pretty much hit the wall. We are going to declare ourselves to be out of time to bring you anything more in preparation for the weekend. But now we'll just tell you what becomes the job of Justice Putnam at the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what's coming up for today. Trump will get around the constitutional ban on the line item veto by breaking the law, as predicted here on our air only a few days ago. Then, on the rest of the menu, the Trump administration wants to cut internet and phone access to poor Americans, because why should they be allowed to have anything? San Francisco sues Jeff Sessions for rescinding civil rights guidelines that protect minorities and the disabled. And Cambridge Analytica, can you believe they're still around? Help the Philippines' brutal authoritarian leader, Rodrigo Duterte, win his questionable election. It's a quest for world domination, ladies and gentlemen. After the break, they'll move, not our break, their break. They'll move to the chef's table where ICE has no plans to deport a World War II Nazi war criminal immigrant who lied to get his citizenship, while the agency kicks out law-abiding, honest immigrants every day. And as Mueller closes in on Trump, Christian nationalists are betting Mike Pence has been the puppet master they've prayed for all these many decades. That and much, much more, of course, on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef de Cuisine Justice Putnam. Bon appetit and have a great weekend. We'll be back to lament the fate of our country next
From
week.
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I told you there was much, much more to come, and thank God Justice Putnam will round that stuff up for you later on. I'm sure we'll have moved on to fresh outrage by Monday. I can't even begin to guess what it might be, but it might begin with the firing of Robert Mueller, and we'll tell you about our plans for that if it doesn't happen next week.